Hi everybody, Brittany Trumpy here. I just finished my 19th book for the year. I know I usually post once a week, but this book took me 2 weeks to finish, and I was tempted to do a review kind of halfway through, which really would have worked for this book, but I didn't. So here we are. So the book in question, that's Table for Two by Amor Towles. It is one of his newest books, newest releases. I have read a couple of his other books. I've read A Gentleman in Moscow, and I've read Rules of Civility, which was interesting because Rules of Civility actually has a big part in the second portion of this book. So that's how we're going to discuss this, is in the two halves, because the first half of this book is just a number of unrelated short stories, and then the second half of the book is just one cohesive story with a couple of different chapters. Okay, so the first half, it's a bunch of short stories. If you've never read Amor Towles before, I think this is a good gateway book because the short stories allow you to get used to his style of writing without having to fully invest in a 400 to 500 page book, because all of his books are extremely long. That being said, even though you're only with these characters for maybe 70 pages, 60, 70 pages, you can get very easily invested in that short period of time. He writes the most interesting characters. A lot of his stuff is not necessarily modern though. Rules of Civility is back kind of 1940s-ish. Gentleman in Moscow is during the time where Russia kind of goes from a monarchy or an oligarchy, I'm not sure which one, into Soviet Russia. So they're both historic pieces. That's kind of what he traditionally does. I think Lincoln Highway is set in the U.S. I haven't read it yet. And that one is also set back, I think, in either the 40s or the 30s. I can't remember. But they're great. They're great characters. Each one of the short stories, you get invested in them in a short period of time. They're great as far as the tangents go. Something about Amor Towles, he likes to take a lot of tangents where his characters tell backstory or they tell something about themselves. And when I first started reading his books, it kind of drove me nuts. So I remember reading Gentleman in Moscow, and you would meet this kind of new, seemingly inconsequential character, and you would spend a good 15-20 pages on some sort of tangent where they're talking about 20 years ago when they were growing up in this village, and at first it was really frustrating. I was like, why are we doing this? But in some way it all comes back to being important and helps to really build the world and really builds the character. So that's a really special skill that he has, and he definitely showcases it in this book, both in the first half and the second half. The stories in the first half are set in New York and Russia. I think the first one is Russia, and then all of the other ones, I believe, are in New York. And again, they're all kind of older. So the Russia one is again set back in Soviet Russia, and then the New York ones, I think some of them are kind of 1980s, 1990s. None of them are necessarily super modern. So there's also the different time periods. So each story is really unique. So love the first half. Okay, the second half I thought was really interesting. It picks up with a character that is in Rules of Civility. So I have read that book. It's been many, many years, so I don't remember much about this character, how she got to where she's at right now. Her story starts with her getting on a train and supposed to be getting off in Chicago, but she doesn't. She goes all the way to LA instead and extends her ticket. I don't remember the background for Evelyn. That's the name of the character, but I do remember her being in the first book. That being said, if you didn't read Rules of Civility, you can still get into this and enjoy the whole second half of the book without knowing her backstory, because here I am, someone who has read it and I don't even remember it, and I still was able to enjoy Evelyn and everything that goes on. So that was really interesting and clever. It was like he wasn't finished with that character and wanted to explore some more of her storyline and her world, and so he decided to do it in the second half of this book. One thing that I thought was really interesting about this book was towards the end of the second half, it kind of was giving me Agatha Christie vibes, where you're going through the same time frame, 10 o'clock to 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. You're going through the same time frame again and again, but from different points of view. So you are uncovering details and information that you did not previously have. Agatha Christie does that a lot in her books, where you have one character going through the same time period and you experience it from their perspective and what they did, and then you'll start over again with a different character who was in the same place at the same time, but they saw different things and they experienced different things. And so you get this really cool layered sort of storytelling. The second half of the book, so I guess the last quarter of the book, gave me that vibe where we were going through the same sequence of events, but we were seeing it from multiple characters' different points of view. So that was kind of cool, and I enjoyed that because I do like Agatha Christie. I do like some mystery books. So I thought that was kind of cool, and I've never seen him necessarily do that. He did it a little bit in Gentleman in Moscow, but that was really interesting. Each chapter is also a different character, which I enjoyed. So I would say obviously the second half of the book is about Evelyn Ross, who was in Rules of Civility. Basically each chapter is a different character interacting with her, and then I think there's maybe 2 or 3 of those chapters where it's actually from her perspective. So that was really interesting. You can see how other people interpret things that she does and says and things like that. And again, the time is awesome. It's old Hollywood. It's the 1940s, during the time of, MGM and Warner Brothers and all these giant studios and the contract actresses and things like that. It was so good. And again, I think this is a great lead-in to Amor, Towles. If you've never read him and you've been sort of intimidated by the length of his books because they are all monsters, this is a good way to get into it. You get used to his writing style. You get used to the way that he does things without being kind of swamped with 500 pages worth of text. So 5 out of 5, loved that. Glad I did it. I need to do Lincoln Highway. It has been on my TBR for a long time, but because that book took me 2 weeks to get done, which is a me problem, I don't know if I'll have time to do Lincoln Highway because I'm trying to stay on track and do 50 books this year, and I think that book might have set me back. But anyway, our next book, number 20, is going to be Death of a Bookseller by Alice Slater. I've already read, I think, maybe 20 pages of it. It seems kind of quirky and funny. It's modern. It has to do with true crime podcasters, which is not necessarily my number one joy in life, but I definitely listen to some. And just the little bit that I've read so far seems kind of accurate about the people who listen to them and the people who make them and the live shows, and just some of the kind of quirky, funny messages kind of seem spot on. So that's going to be number 20. If you've read either of these books, let me know your thoughts and feelings, or if you've read any of the other Amor, Towles books, if you read Rules of Civility, Lincoln Highway, or Gentleman in Moscow, let me know. Again, I've read Rules of Civility. I don't remember it. I do remember enjoying it. And I do remember Gentleman in Moscow. I remember a lot of details from that book, and I loved that. I have Lincoln Highway, but I haven't read it yet. But if you've read any of his stuff, let me know your thoughts and feelings if you also enjoyed it. Or if you've read Death of a Bookseller, let me know. Alrighty, thank you guys, and I will be seeing you hopefully next week. Hopefully this one doesn't take me as long to read.